Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for the 23rd of September 2024. I'm going to be talking today about the showdown that's going to take place at the United Nations over the next week or so. Now, I know many of you see the United Nations as at best impotent and at worst as an instrument of the Malthusian globalists of the TransAtlantic Alliance. But nevertheless, it will be the scene of an intense debate as the forces that oppose that transatlantic imperial policy will have an opportunity to raise issues of war and peace. And it's a moment of great potential as the majority of the human race is moving away from the Unipolar Order, which the US and the British and NATO are trying to sustain and impose their genocidal policies on the world. Now, the Brits will be providing the leadership of the war faction, headed by Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And they're going to be pushing the so-called Zelensky victory plan, which is the idea that the West should provide long-range missiles, including nuclear-capable missiles, to Ukraine to launch attacks deep into Russian territory. Now, such missile strikes would require U.S. approval and U.S. guidance, and that's why President Putin has said that Russia will take any attack on Russian territory with these long-range missiles as a declaration of war by NATO against Russia. And the Russians have said they will respond symmetrically and asymmetrically to any such attacks. Now, the British press and the defense sector of Britain and people like Blinken, who's nothing but a salesman for the transatlantic war policy, they're saying, well, Putin's bluffing. He won't do that. There's no threat. And in fact, the British press goes so far as to say that by not providing these weapons, you're giving Putin a victory. But by providing these weapons and the attack, that's the only way to stop Putin from launching a full-scale invasion of the rest of Europe. There's absolutely no evidence that such a thing would happen. The idea is the preservation of a collapsing order. And that means that it can only be achieved by stopping Russia and the global South from defending the sovereignty of their nations. Now, that's why Scott Ritter on Friday, September 20th, in his address to the International Peace Coalition Zoom Call, made it clear that we are facing the possible end of civilization if Starmer and Blinken have their way. What he said is that if you get an agreement, or had you had an agreement at the Friday the 13th meeting that Starmer had with Biden, that missiles would have been launched that night. And Ritter said that had that happened on Saturday the 14th, quote, we would have all been dead. That is the next day. That's how close we came to nuclear war. We're not quite sure who in the Biden administration put on the brakes. The suspicion is that there are saner heads in the military and possibly even including in the intelligence community. But that Starmer and his fellow NATO war hawks are not going to give in. They're not going to stop. They're going to try again to shift whoever's running the Biden administration to adopt this escalation of the war policy. And that's what's going to be going on the next couple of days at the UN General Assembly. Now, the fear that drives them, these war hawks, is not only that NATO's losing the war in Ukraine and that the support for Israel's genocide against the Palestinians has turned the world against them, but that the looming bankruptcy of the Western financial system is leading to momentum for de-dollarization. In other words, the weaponization of the dollar, which is at the center of the Unipolar Order, with sanctions, with austerity economic policies, with holding back credit and so on. that's actually driving the forces toward de-dollarization. And so their policies are worsening the situation, and you can see it in Europe. The higher price of electricity as a result of the green agenda, the cutoff of Russian oil and gas, that's leading to economic chaos in Germany and France and Italy, throughout the Eurozone. And the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the 4 new BRICS members, and the 30-something applicants to join the BRICS, have already decided that the Unipolar Order goes against their sovereign interests, and that the support for Netanyahu, the support for Zelensky, is escalating the danger of nuclear war. So the International Peace Coalition event last Friday, this was made very, very clear by Scott Ritter, by Ray McGovern, by the initial presentation by my colleague Dennis Small, which led to an in-depth discussion of the crisis. Not just the strategic military crisis, but where that comes from. Why nations such as the United States, Germany, France, and others are willing to risk the end of civilization for the sake of preserving an imperial order which is collapsing right in front of us. Now, we also see that there's a growth in the political anti-war sentiment in the West. This occurred again in the elections in Brandenburg yesterday, where the 2 leading anti-war parties, the Alternative for Deutschland and the Sarah Wagenknecht group, were the big winners in terms of an increase in votes. And the only way that Scholz's party, the Social Democrats, edged out the Alternative for Deutschland was by getting support kicked to them by the Christian Democrats, who lost support commensurate to the support gained by the SPD. This means in the last 3 state elections in Germany, the anti-war parties were the largest parties, and the pro-war coalition, the Scholz, Greens, and Free Democrats, were the biggest losers. In fact, in Brandenburg, both the Greens and the FDP were below the level needed to even remain in the state parliament. Now, in the United States, you had an op-ed printed in The Hill by Donald Trump Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., warning of the danger that the Biden-Harris policy is taking us to the brink of nuclear war. And this is being backed up by people such as Tulsi Gabbard, former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, and Green Party candidate Jill Stein. There's a growth in anti-war sentiment because number one, the population in the United States sees no benefit to arming Ukraine and launching strikes against Russia, especially at a point in which over $200 billion has been transferred into this war economy, taken away from infrastructure, from hospitals, from healthcare, from education, and so on. But also when the policy direction of the Biden-Harris team is toward more of the same. Now, what Ritter said at the IPC, the International Peace Coalition Conference on Friday, is that this should be the leading issue in the presidential campaign. Most people know where Harris stands on identity politics and woke issues. But how many know that she intends to continue the Biden war policies, which threaten to unleash a civilization-ending nuclear war? Make that the issue. And that's what we are doing. I'm calling upon all our viewers to do whatever you can to mobilize support for the Global South and the initiatives at the United Nations to stop the wars. Stop funding the Ukraine war. Stop the U.S. funds from going to Netanyahu and his band of killers. There needs to be a ceasefire in Gaza, a ceasefire throughout Israel, and instead Netanyahu is escalating, as we see Starmer and his gang wish to escalate in Ukraine. So the issue is clear. It's nuclear war to stop the emergence of a new strategic and economic development architecture, we should be standing in the West with the Global South, with the BRICS, and against the City of London. And that's the importance of this showdown in New York City that's going on this week.